Hello, and you are all very welcome to Behavioural Science Club on what in Ireland is a very, very hot day. I just chatting with Prakash before you all joined us, I said to him, what on earth were we thinking setting up an event on what for me is a Saturday afternoon in the middle of the summer? But we decided we must have been a little bit more wrapped up with COVID last year. So today, as usual, you are all very, very welcome all around the world where you join us from. You might like to put in the chat here now, say hi, where you're joining us from, what the weather's like there today. And today we are very delighted to have with us Cerita Bethea. And I first came across Cerita. Everyone knows how nudgestock mad we are here. And I first came across Cerita in her talk in 2020 in Nudgestock. And Cerita was in a panel conversation with Grace Lorden, who we've already had here as a guest, and with also Neela Saldana. And for those of you who didn't hear Cerita's talk that particular year, I'm going to dive straight in and say hi, Cerita, and ask if you wouldn't mind telling us the most lovely story that you told at the time about how you came to study psychology in university, and also what you called your first experience of a nudge.
Very good. First of all, thank you so very much for having me. I'm honored and humbled to be amongst the roster of great authors that you've brought to the club and thought leaders. So very, very happy to be with you today. As hot as it is, yes, in Atlanta, it is also very hot and humid today, but no rain, so that is good. So I think, well, you know what, first, I'd just like to talk about, give you a little bit of background about me, and then I'll dive into how I got into behavioral science, because I think oftentimes, you know, we look at people who come to speak to us and it's like, you know, oh, so awesome, you know, what they do in behavioral science, but I have a world outside of behavioral science as well. I am married to a most wonderful and delicious man, Bernard Bethea. We have 3 lovely children. They are all young adults now. That's his Candace, who is our eldest, and she's quite a delight. She has a PhD in math, if I may just brag a little bit, PhD in math, and works for Bain Consulting now. But she also rides motorcycles and makes clothes and plays the violin. I mean, she's just amazing. And then our son Christopher, he's a senior in college now, and he's interested in multimedia film production. So, you know, something just like math, I know nothing about, but he's just really, really good at it. And Catherine is up and coming as our 19, almost 20-year-old in college. And she's finding her way, and you know, it's been amazing just watching her grow from this elite gymnast into the lovely young woman that she is today. And so I thought I'd give you, again, just a little bit of background about me. So what you see here in the middle is not a picture of my living room, rather it's a picture of my hobby. So I am a miniaturist, and I love designing and building miniature doll houses. And so this is one room box that I created. It's probably my favorite because Christmas time is my favorite time of the year. And I also love bird watching. And so we've got bird feeders and bird baths in the backyard. And so that's the image that you see there. So despite the persona that you see in presentations, I'm actually quite introverted and relish those quiet moments. So that's me. Beyond behavioral science. And so as Louise mentioned, I shared in Nudgestock in 2020 a little bit about my background and how it is that I landed in behavioral science. And that started at the University of Illinois. So when I came into college, I didn't actually have a major. I graduated top of my class in high school, and thought it looked really strange that I didn't know what I wanted to major in. What I did know was that I wanted to go to law school, so it didn't matter what I majored in. I had my sights set on law school, and that came from early years, like literally 4 or 5 years old, watching this show. And I'm going to date myself, but it was a Perry Mason show. And he was this vociferous lawyer, in the courtroom. I'm like, I want to be like that. And so, I had my sights set on law, and I just picked psychology, just picked it because I needed a major. And it turns out I really enjoyed the very first class of psychology, Psych 101. And towards the end of the class, there was this teaching assistant who was not my teaching assistant, actually, but I would attend some of her study sessions for exams. And so she knew me that way. And out of the blue one day, she just walked up to me and asked if I was familiar with this discipline in psychology called engineering psychology, or human factors engineering. And I had never heard of it. And she said, I think it's something you might be interested in. You should check it out. That was it. She was gone. Her name was Beverly. I have no idea where Beverly is today. I wish I knew. So if you're out there, Beverly, please let me know so I can thank you. But I did. I went to the psych office and got a couple of pamphlets on it. I'm like, this actually does sound pretty interesting. I didn't know something like this existed. And it really has to do with taking principles of psychology and what we know about human performance and attention and sensory perception, and applying that to the design of everyday things, right? So that we're designing for the capabilities of the human operator as well as understanding what the limitations are, versus wanting a human to adopt and adapt to whatever it is that we've designed for them. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And so time goes on. That was my first nudge, by the way. And although nudges didn't really exist at that time in nomenclature. So I go on, and ultimately I work with a professor, Art Kramer, on a honors psych project in human factors engineering psychology. The terms are synonymous. And at the end, I'm, senior year, and I ask them, I say, this is all really interesting. I've learned a lot about the scientific method. I've learned a lot about, this particular topic that we've studied, but who outside of academia would be interested in this? Who would learn from this? And he gave me a couple of, esoteric examples, and, because this is academia, and they don't necessarily, get involved in, or at least at that time, really care about what goes on outside of academia. But he gave me a couple of examples. And then I got my second nudge, and that was, but perhaps you can, can look more deeply into this and come back and tell us how it is that we can leverage what we know about these principles in psychology to the real world. And I thought, I'll take you up on that challenge. And so I went on to grad school and was in a PhD program at Georgia Tech in engineering psychology. So one of the best programs in engineering psychology at that time. And then I realized, I don't really know if I want to stay in academia or go into industry, but I've never tried industry before. So how would I know? And so I took a terminal master's, which is as awful as it sounds. When you're in a PhD program, you're supposed to finish the PhD program. So I took that break after the master's and started looking for a job in industry. there wasn't really the internet at that time. It was more about who you knew, conferences and that sort of thing. And it happened that Ford Motor Company was looking for a psychologist. And it was in the area of sound quality in their scientific research lab. And what I learned very quickly was that everyone in the scientific research lab, and it wasn't a one-room lab, this is a whole function. There are hundreds of people in the scientific research community at Ford. And everyone, at least at that time, from the president down, had a PhD. There were a few people like me in the middle, very, very few, and then technicians. And so I thought, I probably need this thing. I probably need the PhD regardless of if I'm in academia or in industry. So I did the the crazy non-traditional thing, because I'm pretty non-traditional. And that is continue to work, because Ford gave me that opportunity to do that. To continue to work if I went to a school in Michigan. So that's how I ended up at the University of Michigan, which was not a bad deal at all. Absolutely learned a lot from the best of the best in psychology while working at the same time, which is absolutely nuts. Towards the end of that tenure at Michigan, I met Bernard, who lived in California. I was in Michigan. And, it was an opportunity to actually get this Midwestern girl, I'm from Chicago, out of the Midwest and go to California. And so I left Ford Motor, certainly not out of any type of grudge or discontent, but rather love. And actually it was someone at Ford at my team who introduced me to the general manager of human factors at Toyota. So that's how I ended up at Toyota, also in human factors engineering. So at that time, long story short, this terminology about behavioral science did not exist. So the way in for a social scientist was through this sensory testing or human factors engineering. There were these sort of peripheral fields that you could go into if you wanted to practice what you learned in social science. From Toyota, I then went to Kimberly-Clark. Again, one of those, I guess being in the right place at the right time, they were looking for a psychologist to, and this was in product development. So at Ford and at Toyota, I worked primarily in design and packaging. This is the automotive company industry, right? So there's a lot that can be done with understanding vehicle packaging and how it is that we can better accommodate the driver and passengers in the vehicle environment. Kimberly-Clark was a completely different function. And so they were interested in understanding during that time how it is that we can better understand emotions. And, because there was this aha moment that, we may be missing something as we look at functional benefits for consumers just at large. And there's also this emotional piece, but we don't know anything about it. The great secret is neither did I. I just told you what my background was in human factors engineering, cognitive psychology. So PhD was in cognitive psychology. So I did not have a background in social psychology, though I did have some, or at least enough familiarity with the subject that I could learn very quickly what needed to be learned in order to, again, apply that to product development, innovation, and marketing at Kimberly-Clark. And so over time, I was with Kimberly-Clark for the better part of 14 years. That did evolve into this area that we're now calling behavioral science. And I fully predict that in the next 5 or 10 years, it'll be called something else, but then that's okay. We'll just roll with it. So you did a lot of that sensory testing, did a lot of that emotion measurement, and creating of frameworks to better understand how it is that we can make that emotional connection with our consumers and have that complement what we understand about functional benefits, et cetera. Again, the latter part of my tenure at Kimberly-Clark was devoted to this discipline within what we now call behavioral science and behavioral economics. And so now, having been at Coca-Cola for the last 3 years, actually my anniversary was yesterday, so 3 years at Coke, it's just a continuation of that, and more importantly, a part of that evolution of behavioral science, where it's less about the methods now and the measurement, although that will always be important. That will always be important. But rather how it is that we can leverage what we know about, principles and insights in behavior and decision making to inform our understanding of humans. It helps us to explain that human behavior as much as nudging and changing behavior and predicting behavior. And I think that's where the gold is in behavioral science as we continue to evolve the discipline, is really to look to what are those areas where we can leverage the discipline to inform innovation. And even within research, just sticking with research, how it is that we can leverage behavioral science to inform, how we develop hypotheses, how we recruit, how we interpret the data that we have coming back from research, how we can communicate that data, those results with influence. We can leverage behavioral science for that as well. And so I just think there's a world that's ripe for behavioral science and bringing in those other disciplines of behavioral science beyond the cognitive and social and behavioral economics that we've traditionally leveraged.
Fantastic introduction, Cerita, and I love that you have told us about yourself as opposed to just the professional Cerita, which I'm sure that all of our people who've joined us today will have really enjoyed your story. You're a very good storyteller. And also, I liked it because, of course, in your second talk that I saw with Nudgestock this year, you did then speak about the development of behavioral science, but also you very nicely said that behind every business problem is a human problem. So we've seen the human Cerita behind the corporate Cerita, which is really lovely. And when you spoke again at Nudgestock, you're still delighted to be asked back.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. No, it is always, it's like I said, it is always very, very humbling to be asked. So, and thank you.
You mentioned at the end of your talk about how you feel that as social scientists, behavioral scientists, whichever label you want to put on people, you said that you feel now is the time that people really need to get out from behind the desk and actually be within the feel in the consumer's shoes. What exactly were you hoping for there?
Yeah, I think that, as the language is evolving, we talk about being consumer centric, and in my mind, it's very difficult to do that from behind a desk and just reading reports and commissioning studies. I think it's incumbent upon us to also, so in addition to, not in lieu of, but in addition to that, really get out and experience our humans and in whatever context it is that we need to understand them. So the one thing I really, really enjoy with my job is getting, at least before COVID, getting to travel to different countries. And that's when I observe the most, right? So going to Japan, now having worked at Toyota, I understand the culture, the corporate culture of a Japanese company. Going to Tokyo and getting to see that, no, this isn't just a corporate thing. This is the culture that is lived day to day, amongst the people is just fascinating. Is from the time I landed at the airport. I mean, I actually took notes, and yes, that's, I know that's a really nerdy thing to do, but I actually would take notes because it was just so fascinating to me how super efficient the airport is. And I'm coming from Atlanta, where it's the busiest airport in the world, but it is hardly the most efficient. And I'm like, look at what we can learn. Somebody needs to come to Tokyo to just learn how the queues, are run, and then how it is that they are able to do the exact same things that every other airport has to do through customs, but they do it so much faster, so much better, so much, there's so much efficiency, so much to learn. That's one example of being consumer centric. One of my last trips before COVID, and I won't say what the country is, but it was my first time there. And what I noticed, just going to a mall, so it's kind of an occupational hazard that I just observe. So I went to a mall and went to eat at what we call the food court. I don't know that that's what they call it necessarily, but it's a number of different quick service food options and such. And I get my meal and I sit to eat, and I'm alone. And I got a beverage from a juice bar that was there. And I noticed that very, very few people, the food court area was filled with people. Very few had a beverage. And that was just amazing to me that so few had a beverage. And that generates so many questions and so many hypotheses that follow from that, beyond just let's measure, what the associations are between this brand and that. No, why is it that they don't have beverages? Did they drink before they got here? Is it that the bowl of soup serves as the liquid to wash the meal down? And then for those that do have the beverage, what are they drinking? Why are they drinking that? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it carbonated? Is it still? There are lots of questions. There are lots of hypotheses. But sitting at a desk, we wouldn't necessarily, be able to ask those questions. We'd have to rely on those who are in those environments, in those cultures, to come back and tell us, which they may actually take for granted because that's just how things are, where in their context. And so that's why I think it's really important for us to, as behavioral scientists, to really get out and observe what it is that people are actually doing, because it will spark those questions and hypotheses that then we can go and test and further explore that we honestly may not have thought of before. It just adds a level of richness to have that one-on-one experience with consumers.
Yeah, I love that you've said that, Cerita. I work in market research, and there's nothing like bringing one of our researchers out with us,
right,
door to door, or standing on the street, or standing in a hall, and for them to get the real feel of how are my questions being asked, and
right,
the whole, and they taking that experience then back to the office completely opens a new area of vision. Fantastic introduction, Cerita. I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to hand you over now to my co-host, Prakash, and then we'll be opening up for our members' questions. So thank you so much, Cerita.
Lovely.
Fantastic to talk to you.
Thanks, Louise.
Thank you so much, Louise. Cerita, thank you for joining us. And we can see a good amount of people who are here. Just to give a context to people who have joined us for the first time, it's pretty much people from all over the world, people from we've got people from the Himalayan countries and people from Nepal out in the group right now, but we also have people from Argentina, I think 3, 4 of them right now.
Yes.
So that tells you the spread. The Australians are sleeping and they are very
Yes.
unhappy about this time. But, mostly that they're really, very, this is their group, right? Um, I'm thinking, where do we start? Because you said fantastic things. You talked about your daughter being a gymnast. And then this is something that we've been very fascinated with at the whole Behavioral Science Club, with the Now Fest also. Looking at behavioral science from multiple lenses, not just from the academic lens or from business lens. You look at athletes.
Yes.
And so I think let's go there. You are a behavioral scientist, you've got a fantastic daughter, she's a gymnast. And the whole game of becoming a top-notch performer, an athlete, is repeatedly being able to do, certain things regularly. And there's an entire game of, I think motivation is not enough beyond a point in that journey, right?
Right.
Can you tell us something about this world of physical activities? And most of us are struggling with the whole pandemic. We would like to be fitter.
Right.
How is the world like that? What has been your experience as a mother
Mm-hmm.
and as a behavioral scientist with this whole world of physical fitness and behavioral science? Are there things we can learn out of this, Cerita? Very open question.
Oh, absolutely.
Take it which way you want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And great question, which takes me back to my origin story of behavioral science, because what I didn't mention is that the topic I studied at U of I for that honors thesis was actually theories of automaticity, which is the sort of the grandfather of habit, right? And so how is it that we are able to develop and acquire skills, which is what you're speaking to now with athletes? So the theory behind that, has to do with consistency, not only just repetition, but consistency in the repetition. So if you're trying to acquire a new skill, it doesn't help to have every time you do the same thing, you have a different approach to how you do it. There needs to be consistency in the repetition, and I think that's what. And then as those skills get developed, and we've developed the automaticity for it, we've learned, and you can apply that to anything, whether it's the skills that athletes acquire, whether it's learning how to drive, because that's a skill as well, or learning how to fly a plane. That's a skill as well. There are certain skills that are associated with that as well. Yes, you need some level of motivation, but you also need and you'll hear obviously the idea about repetition and who knows how many days. I think it really depends. You hear 21 days. I don't necessarily ascribe to that. I think it really depends on the emotion, that's associated with that task as to how quickly you acquire a skill, or repetition in a behavior. So let me give you a concrete example of someone. Let's say someone leaves their gardening shoes in the garage. That's just where they store them, and they're going to put those shoes on to go garden. Put their foot in the shoe, and there's something hard in the toe. They take the shoe off, they shake the shoe out, and there's a big hairy spider that's in the shoe. How long do you think is going to take them? Is it going to take them 21 days to now acquire this habit of shaking out the shoe before putting the shoe on? Probably not, because that was a pretty strong emotion associated with that behavior. So they're going to develop that habit pretty quickly. It only takes one time for something like that to happen. Other things, yeah, probably longer, and maybe even more than the 21 days. But yes, there needs to be some level of motivation, and there needs to be, depending on that level of motivation, it needs to be easy. you know, for people have to have the ability to do it. And if you're attuned to BMAP, you know, that's where I'm headed, right? So you need to have some level of ability to do the behavior and some cue or prompt to initiate it. But what that prompt is doing even is initiating that emotional reaction to prompt the action to do something. And I don't think it's any different. I think we have a lot to learn from athletes in that regard, as to how they get to the level where they're at. You're talking about an incredible amount of practice over time, with consistency, with a high level of motivation. And it's not easy necessarily, but, you know, baby steps. So you don't just start doing windmills on bars when you're in gymnastics. You got to start small, and you can apply those same principles to almost any behavior or skill that you're looking to acquire. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Sarita. Lovely. I actually was listening to an interview by one of the greatest MMA fighters of all times, Khabib, and he was giving his opinion on this recent UFC match, Dustin Poirier versus McGregor. Violent sport, I know, but to come to the point, he is very much connected to what you're saying right now, which is that I'm not relying a lot on motivation, instead following a system, which is BMAP pretty much is around. You have to create your entire system around there individually. I want to connect two things that you talked about. One was your story about possibly ending up doing law. You talked about Perry Mason, right? So from there, that helped me remember Boston Legal. Fantastic show. And the whole game with Boston Legal, and has been around James Spader's character, Alan Shore, I think is his name. He is very good, fantastic arguments, framing arguments very well.
Yes.
Right. That seems to be a specialty, and that I think is something common that this show has with the whole art of being a behavioral strategist or a behavioral scientist, to be able to frame, contextualize,
absolutely,
and help understand that while you might be a liberal or a Democrat and you may not like the idea for Fox News, if you look at the larger context, and if you're talking about freedom of speech, you require that too. And you might be a right-leaning Republican, you may not write a couple of things, but if you understand that context, it becomes easy to understand each other. So I think two questions there is. One is, like, I also know you went to Japan, and I just put up a message out there saying in China, this particular smiley, I just found this out recently, and we understand cross-cultural differences, but it's still mind-blowing to realize that is taken as mocking, that emoji which I put in the chat in China, right? So connecting this, I think one question before we open up for Q&A. What do you do in your own life with regards to the work that you do, right? Which can make it easier, framing arguments, contextualizing. We work with multicultural teams. It's a very open question again. Pick up whichever angle you want, Sarita. But talking about framing and context.
Yeah, I think framing is key, right? And it's one of those cognitive heuristics, that we use in research, that we use in influence when communicating. And I'll go back to an earlier statement about being truly consumer centristic, or being able to center on your consumer, your human, as I like to call them. It's not always about the consumer. We're all humans. And that is, in order for me to frame, I need to understand you as an individual. I need to understand if let's take COVID as the example. This was, in my mind, just a wonderful case study. It's a human, it's the social experiment of our lifetime, right? The largest social experiment of our lifetime, where we had so much opportunity to leverage what we know about principles of behavioral science and those insights to inform messaging. So, if we want people to wear masks, is it better to make people feel stupid for not wearing masks if they choose not to? Understanding that their frame is all about freedom. It's that psychological reactance, right? You're not going to take away my freedom. I have the right to refuse if I want to. If that's the frame of mind that you're dealing with, then as behavioral scientists, we should know that fighting a belief is futile. Rather than try and challenge a belief, we should be trying to reframe, understanding, taking the time to understand where they're coming from and why they're behaving the way that they do, and why they have the beliefs that they have, in order to create a frame that might give them permission to come outside of what they believe to do something differently. And I'm not saying I have all the answers to what that frame is, but I do believe that that's the kind of thinking that's needed, because we're talking about saving lives. We're not talking about who's right and who's wrong politically. We're talking about saving lives. And to that end, what can we as behavioral scientists do to better frame the messaging to save lives? Because in the end, when we talk about nudges, we talk about nudges for good. If ever there was a good to be done, this pandemic has shown us that this time is ripe for that.
Well, thank you so much, Cerita. And Luis, I just want to quickly give a small shout out to Iris, Fernando from Argentina. We got Divya Thakur. We got Carla. Carla was here last time too. Kirsten, Muskan, Peter. A couple of you have joined for almost the first time out here. Please, this is your forum. Start, ping your questions straight up out here. No formalities. There is no standing on ceremony out here. Sorry, I got 2,000 questions, but if we are lucky, Luis is gonna probably extend it by like 15, 20 minutes if you already have the time. It's a Saturday morning for you. And if we can go beyond time a bit, I think people have a lot of questions. Please oblige us. Luis, you too. I know you're strict with the time, but maybe today you should make an exception. If Cerita is schooling, all yours.
Thanks so much, Prakash. Yes, I'm a stickler for the time, Cerita. So yeah, we've had some fantastic questions coming in, and Shrutin, who joins us very often, Cerita actually said that he thought this was the best introduction by a guest speaker. So praise indeed, Cerita. So we had a nice question quite early on from Dan Bennett, about asking why people stick behind their desks. Dan, are you with us to put that question to Cerita? No, Dan? Okay, well, the question anyway, Cerita, was Dan was asking, actually, just why do you think people do sort of stick behind their desks, as it were? Is there a certain type of person who is much more apt to want to go out into the field? Is it sort of a fear of feeling out of their depth, or what's your particular take on that?
And this is just my opinion based on observations and experiences. I don't think it's the case largely that people want to stay behind their desks. I think sometimes it's a function of that's just what they've always done. And I also think it's a function of they haven't been asked. They haven't been asked.
Yeah,
And
I think
if
you've
it's
really
not
landed on,
something,
yeah, I think you've really landed on something there, Sarita, as you say, and people are very ingrained into understanding what their role particularly is. So
right,
when your dad are in there and say, oh, would you like to come out with us on Tuesday because we're doing door to door down such and such, like, oh,
right,
am I allowed to do that?
right. And, you know, large part, what I've noticed is when they are asked, again, sort of applying those simplicity factors of, you know, what is it, what's the scarcest resource at the time? It is time. So, you know, if you understand that, and, you know, and don't ask someone to leave their desk for an entire day, but even like over lunch, can we go to X place to observe, you know, people doing Y? Most people are willing to do that. That's been my experience. Most people are willing to do that. And if you then attach that field trip to an objective that is relevant to them, then even more so they're willing to do it.
Great,
So,
thanks. Yeah,
yeah.
thanks, Sarita. Sorry, Dan is with us, but he's listening from the car, so he didn't want to
Hi, Dan.
connect from his car. A sort of associated question was an earlier one from Arvind, if Arvind is with us, which was asking about how to share insights. Are you with us, Arvind?
Yes, I am. So my question is a two-parter, as always is. So the first part is the fact that, you know, there is discordance between the language which is used in academic circles and the sort of language which is used in industry. So I was really curious to know as to how you navigated that.
Yes.
Secondly, the second part of my question was the fact that, having dealt with Japanese firms myself, automotive firms, I know for a fact that they have a strong quant bent towards taking in insights and actionable recommendations. So when, you know, and behavioral recommendations and insights which are provided to the product team or the engineering team, and, you know, everything else is a very narrative sort of take that we do. So how do we sort of bridge the narrative versus a whole section of departments who are sort of, you know, already have the pushback against accepting anything that comes their way? So
Right. Language is important. And, you know, I've learned sometimes the hard way that it's better to call something what people want to call it, and as they understand it, as long as the intent and the definition behind it is the same, fine. You know, if people don't like the word trigger, fine, we can call it a prompt, we can call it a cue, we can call it a reminder, we can call it whatever it is that's going to make you comfortable, as long as we're all aligned on what it means, whatever that is. So I'm all for us adjusting. You know, we have to make the adjustments. It kind of goes back to that the training in engineering psychology. Rather than requiring industry to adjust to us, we need to adjust our language for our clients, our internal clients as well as external. And the same, Arvind, for the question on insights in a Japanese company, I think that the same holds true. It's all about understanding. For me, you know, before I go in talking about any kind of behavioral principles, I think it's important to build trust and build relationships so that you understand where your internal clients were coming from, what their history is, whether that's history, whether that's baggage, whether, you know, it's legacy. Understand it so that you know how to best then frame whatever insights you have to help them, because that's ultimately what we're looking to do, is to bring in these insights to help, to inform, to support whatever those objectives, business objectives are. But let's first understand what it is that they need and what it is that's going to be our barrier to getting the information across. And you can only do that by building those relationships first.
Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Arvind. Great questions. And thank you, Sarita. Great to hear industry saying that it will follow the customer. It's a bit like when we see the pathway everyone's been walking, which isn't necessarily the way everybody wanted them to go. Yeah. And
I don't say that that's what we always do, but it's what I would recommend.
The intention.
Right.
Now, there was a nice question early on as well from Shrutin, looking for a possible story of an example. Shrutin, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Louise. Hi, Sarita.
Hi, Shrutin.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, I mean, when we go out to speak with customers, before we actually interact with them, we probably, even though we resist, we would have these assumptions or, our gut feels about how their preferences might, in which direction they might be. So have there been any examples where you have had, such an assumption, and then once you interacted with your customers, it turned out to be very different from what you assumed it to be?
I know that there are. Let me think.
It's okay. I mean, if you can't think right now, maybe you could share it on the, the LinkedIn group maybe later or something.
Yeah, it's not, I don't have a quick example that's coming to mind, but that's kind of human nature. So more generally, we think we know how a marketing organization functions and thinks and performs. We think we know how the design community thinks and performs. And then we find out, well, no, actually, they're more aligned than we think, or not, So for example, with design, they're, probably more aligned to behavioral science, even though they don't call themselves behavioral scientists. But they're the principles that they leverage in design are very closely associated with those in social science. And so we have different language, perhaps, but we both mean the same thing. But maybe I had an assumption that they don't know, and so I need to teach them about blah, blah. And it's like I'm really preaching to the choir because they already know that. Okay, well, that's good to know now. So now how can we partner to build this message together for the rest of the community, kind of thing. So if I had an example, that's probably one with design where I may have had some assumptions about what they already knew about sensation and perception and, some rules of Gestalt thinking and, that kind of thing. No, they got that. They got that.
Thanks, Shrutin. That was a super question. There've been several questions along the lines of sort of different beliefs, which I think sort of wrap up in with that in terms of the language. But there was a very interesting question from Iris. Would you like to ask your question, Iris, about frames and beliefs?
Sure. And hi, Sarita. Really nice
Hello.
to see you. Hi. Yeah, so my question was actually just prompted when you were talking about the people who, choose masks or not to wear masks. And what I wanted to know is, what role can behavioral science play in blocking impulsive actions, when people act impulsively against their own interest or against the interest of their community? So the idea that there's not enough time to sort of logically intervene, right, because of the impulsive action. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Right. Again, you know, you're having to really challenge some deeply rooted beliefs, as we're seeing when it comes to masks. And I don't know that it's necessarily impulsive, you know, the decision to not wear a mask or the decision to not get vaccinated. I think there's actually quite a bit of thought that goes into that. And there's a lot of actively seeking information that confirms those beliefs. And so when you're dealing with that, I think you know, there are a couple of ways. So reframing to higher order benefits that don't attack the person, that don't attack those beliefs, but that hit, and again, I don't have the answer. I don't know what it is, but specifically, but that hit on what it is they do care about, and not just, oh, fellow mankind, you know, your family, we tried that. Okay, so there's something else, there's a sweet spot out there that we've not hit that would resonate with you know, this group of people with these deeply held beliefs, that we could then tap into to reframe. You know, so if you think about like 10 years ago when we had, oh, what was this? I am so sorry, I can't remember his name. Oh, that's terrible. But he did these TED Talks where he talked about energy. You all should know what I'm talking about. These have been around for a while. He talked about energy consumption in California and the different messages that were given, you know, to people. And, you know, it's not that just because we're using behavioral science, and you all know this, preaching to the choir, that everything is going to hit the same, right? That just because we're using a behavioral intervention that it should be successful. No, there's some that are going to work better than others because there's some that are going to resonate better with that higher order framing of giving that permission to break a behavior that, quite frankly, a whole community of people like them who support what they do, you know, that's hard. I mean, take it out of the context of masks. Think about something that you and, you know, everyone around you does, and now somebody wants you to do that thing differently. It's going to take a lot to break from that social norm, because your social norm isn't everybody who's wearing masks. You know, there are a whole lot of people, a whole lot more people that are wearing masks than not. That's not your social norm. So, you know, I think it's going, and that's what has made this pandemic so difficult, is that I think we have in large part failed to understand the deeper resonance that unmasked and unvaccinated people have in order to make that appeal, in order to reframe to whatever that higher order benefit is to them. They're still human. They still cry, they still bleed, they still, you know, if they lose a loved one, they're going to cry. They're not evil people. They're just people who think differently and who have deeply entrenched beliefs and are supported in those beliefs by what they read, what they hear, and a whole community rallying behind them. So it's not an easy task. There is no one solution. But by and large, the messaging that that went out, particularly initially, just wasn't hitting the mark.
Thank you, Iris. That was a super question, and it just leads us sort of full circle, Cerita, because I was thinking as well that you were saying at the end of your last talk at Nudge Talk that in the future we need to more deeply understand the human problems to be solved, and as you're just saying, there is so essential for everyone in industry to recognize they're dealing with people.
Right. Right. And not just industry. I mean, this thing with COVID, that's not an industry problem. It is a human problem, but it's not an industry problem. And I didn't realize that I don't have my laptop plugged in. So I'm going to lose battery in just a second.
Oh, well, it's perfect time, Cerita. We're just coming to the close anyway.
Yeah, I want to leave with one thought, if I may,
sure.
And that is because it's something I've just realized most recently, and I'd love to share with you, and that is.
Uh-oh. We've missed Cerita's last lingering thought there for the last 2 minutes, and I'm sure that we'll find out what that was and be able to share it in the group thread so that you can all hear. Cliffhanger, exactly. There we are. Has it ever been so exciting in Behavioural Science Club? So thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm sure you all agree that conversation with Cerita has been a really fantastic insight into both the person behind the job that she does and also her contribution to behavioural science in industry. So I'll just hand back to Prakash there now, who'll wrap up the event. And thank you all so much for joining us. It's been great to see you all again.
Thank you all for joining in. I think she's going to be joining in like 3-4 minutes. It's just a question of plugging in the charger and your Mac will start like what takes what. Worst case scenario, it's a Windows machine. She works with Coca-Cola. I think it's probably an Apple. Don't count me on that. But so 30-40 seconds, plug in, boom, she'll be back. But before we go, Shrutin, I think you had one question around, has there been any example where someone finds out, goes with a particular assumption and you realize, on ground that the assumption was wrong. So yeah, the quick answer there was one of the tests which we did. I know you wanted the answer out of, Cerita.
Oh, it's as good as coming from you.
Yeah. So there was a particular project, guys, quickly, where it is for an Edtech project. The initial assumption, basis research, was we should possibly introduce a feature in that app which can help parents study with the students or teach the students something, right? And that's because the insight was that parents love teaching. They really want to spend time with their kids teaching. The pandemic and etc., all of that, they want to be involved in it. So that it was basis that insight. There was work. So what should that feature be behaviorally, right? UX, choice, all of that. Should it be my kid telling Shrutin's kid like, oh, my dad can defeat your dad in maths, and then we are competing on maths because the kids are feeling very happy, right? Something like that, right? So thankfully, we revisited the research which came down to us, and then we realized that insight was all wrong. What we meant was, yes, parents do say they want to spend time with kids, teach them, they would love this, right? But if you dig deeper, the reason why Prakash tells it to everyone saying, I want to spend time with the kid and teach, is because you all are looking at me and I want you all to think, wow, what an amazing dad. Society expects me to be a father who's putting time to teach his kids, right? So I am, of course, going to tell you, so I'm guessing what is the right answer here. And so everyone, a lot of the respondents essentially gave the answer from that point of view. And so Cerita was talking about how you need to use behavioral science in the way you do research. This can be, I think, one example. I hope that was
yeah, that was perfect. So I think, yeah, that's where I think framing and all of that would come into play, where we try and quantify, what exactly the parent means by, and then trying to figure out whether or not that feature is actually needed or not.
Yeah.
It's nice example.
You're right out there. So, well, Louise, I know you are like, I think should be closing. I think I'm cool with waiting for 3-4 minutes talking. And if Cerita is here, and I'm hoping she'll join back, that will be fun too. But guys, meanwhile, I think Louise can quickly give us an update on who are our next guests. And that will give us another couple of minutes more. Louise, do you have the list with you?
Yeah, next week our guest is Guru Madhavan, who also spoke at Nudgestock, engineer and behavioural scientist. So I think that's just going to be a really great event. And the following week, the 31st, we're going to be joined by Divya Balakrishna, who is co-founder of the Mensa platform, where I, at the moment, am doing Thinking Fast and Slow, 40 chapters in 40 weeks, every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So I jumped onto that platform to see how it operates, and it's a great platform. So she was a director with Bijou Dominic at one stage in Final Mile. So we've got a great lineup coming. We'll put an update of everybody joining us for the next 4 weeks in the thread. But in the meantime, we're wrapping up this event. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you at the same time next week. Bye now.